Hello, I'm Bret Moss, and you're watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. Our guest today is Mr. Jeff Griffin. Jeff is the Executive Director of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights for the Western United States. Jeff is originally from North Carolina and has been living here in Southern California for the last 5 years. He's married and has 7 children. Mr. Griffin has a bachelor's degree in religion from Campbell University in Eastern North Carolina and a bachelor's in church music from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. Jeff Griffin, welcome back to The Defining Moment. It's a pleasure to have you back in our studio.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
Thanks for coming. Our topic today is Psychiatry's Dangerous Agenda for America. And I'd like you to begin by telling us about the beginnings of psychiatry's agenda in America, if you would.
Okay, you've opened a can of worms with this one, as we discussed briefly before the show started. There is a book that can be purchased on the internet that I think people will find interesting, whether or not they can have it. By that I mean whether or not they can believe it. The title of the book can be one of two things on the internet: Psychopolitics or the Brainwashing Book. Either one of these would be Brainwashing or Psychopolitics. This book, by the way, is a compilation of documents that, according to the introduction in the book, were found, gathered, gleaned, and put together by a professor. I believe his name is John Stuckley. He was a professor at New York University. And in the introduction, he makes the statement that on a professor's salary, he didn't have the money to get this book widely put out. So what he decided to do was he presented it to, in his words in the introduction, the two organizations who had been the most heavily attacked by psychiatry, that being the Christian Scientist and the Dianeticist. Well, Dianetics was the forerunner of Scientology.
Okay.
All right. So we got a copy of that book, we being the Scientologist, the Dianeticist. In that book is a program that they talk about, they being the psychiatrists, the people lecturing on these various lectures, and it came from Russia, by the way, just so people know. These things originated in Russia.
Communist Russia, obviously.
Communist Russia. And they lay out exactly how they're going to take over the world. Not just the United States, but the world. Now, granted, you and I know historically the United States was the country that had to be taken down.
Yes.
Because we had risen to that point where we were the world leader by the 1950s. Today, I don't consider us to possibly have that height anymore. We're too attacked because of some of the things that our leaders have done. And we as individuals have allowed. But we were infiltrated by psychiatry. And you read this little booklet and you begin to find out that our legislature was infiltrated. And they had a plan of how they were going to control the federal legislation in the United States in this book. And what was it, 91, when the Commonwealth of Soviet Socialist Republics broke up and Russia, quote unquote, no longer existed. And I remember I had read the book, the Psychopolitics book, knew it very well. I went to one of the people who was above me in the organizing board of command, chain of command, and I said, you know, this scares the heck out of me. I said, because that means, see, that did not end communism. This is something people need to understand.
Okay.
That didn't end communism.
Tell us more.
Just that we need to know. The breakup of the Commonwealth did not end communism.
Okay.
It only ended that country's control of this huge parcel of land. That's all it ended. It didn't change the fact communism is a thought. It's an idea. It's a political stance, if you will. Okay.
Denies the existence of God.
No, absolutely.
And denies all sorts of human freedom.
Absolutely. And it all is based on weird think, if you will, total aberration. But you get right down to it and trace the history back, and you're going to find some very interesting things occurring on that historical aspect. And that's another show in itself as well. But the fact is, they have had this plan in place for a long time. In the 1940s, the co-founders of the World Federation of Mental Health, Colonel J.R. Rees, a Britishman, and Brock Chisholm, a Canadian psychiatrist, both were, we have the tapes, by the way, of their voices, and you can tell it's them, speaking and saying these things. One of them makes the statement that psychiatry must infiltrate all stratas of society. We must permeate the entire existence of mankind, if you will. And he goes on to say, I believe this was J.R. Rees, he goes on to say, we must move to infiltrate all stratas, the two easiest being education and religion, or education and the church. Then they said the most difficult would be, and the way J.R. Rees says it, medicine, and his British clipping, and law.
Medicine.
Medicine.
Okay.
Medicine? Yes. So, looking at it now, since 1940, we know in the ensuing 50-some odd years, almost 60 now since those statements were made, actually 62 or 3, that they have permeated every one of those areas. They now have, as we talked on a previous show that we did about the incarceration for 72 hours, that's something they got in. And you and I both in our education, and probably everyone that looks at this show, has been educated with Psychology 101, 102 to get our degree. And we've looked at that and we've gone, you know, this kind of sounds interesting. That could probably make sense. And it is my think that the only reason we haven't pursued it as a major study is because we know it isn't true, because it isn't. But it's based on enough truth that it looks interesting to us when we're looking for truth, you see.
That's right.
There's another interesting datum. In order for a lie to exist, there has to be an earlier truth. And this lie of psychology, there had to be an earlier truth. See, in 1879, Carl Wilhelm Friedrich Wundt, a professor of psychology at the University of Leipzig, Germany, pronounced man is not a spiritual being. He does not have a soul. And we have this in his book in our museum in Hollywood. We have that book with that quote right there open.
Okay.
But he pronounced this. As a result, man is just an animal, so it's okay to modify his behavior any way you want to do it. But Pavlov came to Leipzig, Germany, just before the turn of the century back then, and studied under Wundt. Went back to Russia, got grants from the Ivans, Stalin and the others, and decided that he was going to figure out how to control behavior. And so he learned how to make a dog slobber. And it's crude, but it was salivation. But I mean, I don't like psychiatry. But he did. He learned how to ring a bell and get a dog to salivate. And so that was his defining moment, if you will. Look what we can do to people. And Pavlov even took that further. Brutality, and you can see this in our museum, pictures of it. He actually measured the saliva of kids with his training. And I won't go into how nasty he did it, but anyway, he was brutal. That sort of set the pace for what came out of communist Russia and has infiltrated the entire planet, specifically the Western empires, or more specific, the United States. So that is the plan. And if you remember, Khrushchev let the cat out of the bag back in the 50s, before you were born, when he banged his shoe on the table or the bench at the United Nations and then said, "We will take you without a shot being fired." I don't know whether you remember that statement being made or not, but that was the plan. Communism will take over the planet without a shot being fired. So there's your plan for America. Brock Chisholm made the statement that for psychiatry, this is one of their major goals. Quote, the eradication of the concept of right and wrong.
Wow.
This was said in the 1940s.
Unbelievable.
We have the tapes in our museum of those voices making those statements.
Unbelievable.
Now, when you look at, if you want to historically take this thing, let's go back in the United States to about 1940.
Okay.
This country was basically religious, if you will, in everything that it did, in every way that it viewed things. Presidents had to go to church to be a president. That was part of the way to get elected. You had to have some religious group that you were connected to, if you will. I grew up on a farm, and farmers are very religious. This is normal and natural. We understand the cycle of time. We understand the cycle of birth, growth, and death. You know?
Okay.
So it's there for us. So when you look at the United States, up to about 1940, there was a real strong religious teaching, moral society that existed.
Yes.
We frowned on crime. Now, if you statistically look at this thing, in about 1963 or 4, I believe it is, the graphs for two things that I'm going to make a point on here, and we'll go from there. One of them is the educational level was measured by the Scholastic Aptitude Test scores, SAT scores.
Yes.
They leveled out.
Okay.
And then plummeted over the next 30 years. Until in the early 1990s, the powers that be started grading the test on a curve. They had to do something, man. Educational scores are going way down there. And so in the 90s, now we have this type of graph that's going on, up and down type graph. Nowhere near where we were in the early 1960s. At the same time, date coincidence, if you will, what happened otherwise. If you look at the reverse of that, violence and crime began to go up at about the same rate up as education was going down, if you look at those graphs. We have those graphs also, by the way, that we put together on that.
Well, that's very interesting.
So now you know why society went south in a handbasket. And that is because we were infiltrated. Education and religion.
With psychiatry.
By psychiatry. And that's their statements, not mine. This is documented data I'm willing to show anyone.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So what do you believe to be the primary motivation behind their agenda?
Money. Actually, I'm not correct totally. Money is the major thing that we can look at here. But I have a viewpoint.
Yes.
That goes a little bit further than that.
All right, be my guest.
And it's not necessarily that my church will back totally.
Okay.
All right.
This is Jeff speaking
Griffin
for Jeff
speaking. All right.
All right.
But I'm going to go back to the scriptures because we happen to have a common ground here
Sure, go
that
ahead.
we can work with. And it's sort of like the Antichrist. There's that group that is almost that way. I mean, if you want to look at that. But it's even a little deeper than that. It is my feelings looking at anyone who will say to you, me, any other person, parent, grandparent, or otherwise, you need to put this kid on medicine, on a medicine called Ritalin, Strattera, Concerta, any of these. Adderall, I mean, the list is endless. The pharmacological industry just keeps creating them. As one gets taken off the market, Silert, as an example, another one takes its place. But anyone who will say to us, put this child as young as months old up to 18 or older on this medicine, which is nothing in the world but a drug, a toxin, a poison.
Yes.
There has to be an evil motion in that particular person. Now, that's not to say that that person is not basically good. We're all created in the image of the Creator. We've discussed this one, okay? But that person has something in stimulation that is causing them to do something that I consider the most heinous of crimes.
Okay, very clear.
And that's what I think is the basic motivation
All
there.
right. Well, thank you for sharing that very candidly. I appreciate that a lot. Why do you believe that psychiatric medications are harmful to those suffering from mental illnesses and mental disorders?
All right, I'm going to go in the back door on this, first of all, to come back to the beginning of your question. We're going to take the end of it. First of all, there is no such thing as a mental illness. The defining book on this was written along about 1961-62, published by the co-founder of our organization, Dr. Thomas Azaz, who is a psychiatrist. He's a professor emeritus of one of the New York State universities up in Syracuse. And the title of his book is The Myth of Mental Illness. It doesn't exist. It is a made-up term, and he has said this many, many times. He's written 30, 40 books and hundreds upon hundreds of articles. He's well quoted, well known. It doesn't exist. It is a made-up term, and we go back to my original answer to you, why? To make money. If they did not have that, the average person isn't going to go see a psychiatrist. That's why they have these laws passed to make us go.
Right.
Okay? So there's what's existing there. So why is it wrong then?
Why are the medications themselves harmful?
Basically, if you take a body and look at that body for what it is, and you put a toxin in that body, what's going to happen to that body? Is it going to improve or get worse? That's common sense. So you look at these drugs that have been created, by the way, the majority of them out of crude oil. The pharmacological industry is a large buyer of crude. That's where these things come from. It's not like penicillin that's created naturally on the planet, if you will. Okay, you look at that, that's a toxin. Would you want to drink crude oil? Well, go take some of these drugs that are on the market today. That's where they come from. So why would we not want to do that? Because it's a poison. It's a toxin. There is a natural way to handle the aberrant behavior that we're seeing in our fellow man without poisoning him to death.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. And why is Prozac and other drugs like Prozac so commonly prescribed? And what treatment alternatives are available?
All right, let's answer the first part of that question. Why is it so common to see it prescribed? There is, and has been written up now of late in mainstream media, quite a bit of data as relates to how that has occurred, but an enormous amount of money has been spent on marketing to get and the vast majority of these drugs are prescribed by general practitioners. They are preyed upon. We just had our major anniversary event just a couple of weeks ago here in LA, actually 10 days ago, where we celebrated our birthday. One of the people that attended and received an award from us is a former pharmacological salesperson. She tells the story of how her niece died as a result of these drugs, and it was at that, and she had been questioning what she was doing and why prior to that. That was her defining moment, if you will, and it actually created a situation where she went, whoops, I'm actually pushing a lie, and I can't do that anymore. She's written a book, she now does radio, she does television, she's very outspoken about this whole thing. The industry spends an enormous amount of money trying to put out a good front and hiding the truth. And that's why these drugs are being prescribed on a daily basis and such a large amount of it.
Yes.
And that's not okay. It's not right that we allow this to do. There are alternative methods. I mean, go see a doctor and get a thorough physical from A to Z. Because if your behavior has changed, something changed. And the mind will change because of external pressure, if you will. We know that. But generally, the internal body pressure causes a tremendous and rapid change in behavior. So go find out what it is. Is there a nutrient that your body needs that you don't know about? Is there a sickness there that your body that you don't know about? A prime example of this, 5 years ago almost now, I had a case come in right after I'd moved out here. A young lady who had worked at Fox Television Network, and she ended up losing her job. her family, her brothers were drug users, and one had died on an overdose, and she was a little upset about it. Who wouldn't be?
Right.
The family took her to a doctor because she wasn't reacting the way they felt she ought to react. They made her go to an emergency room. She wasn't feeling well. She admitted this. And the doctor took blood for a blood test. But while they're in the emergency room, she had an upset with her family. So the doctor came in and gave her a shot of Haldol, knocked her out. She had never used drugs. She didn't drink, she didn't smoke. Knocked her out. When she woke up, she was behind locked doors in another facility across town with her 72-hour involuntary commitment. She went through a week there, and they finally released her. And then another friend of hers, within 2 weeks, actually fooled her and got her in front of a doctor, and they locked her up again. And she was there for about a week. I pulled all the medical records. I got all the data. She found out, this was like in May or April of that year, she found out in July of that year that what I was able to tell her, just looking at her medical records, was true. And that was she had a urinary tract infection. And it caused an unusual change in behavior so far as the family could see.
Amazing.
And it was not treated. The doctor never diagnosed her with an infection. But she had it through that whole period of having to be subjected to the brutality of psychiatry. A beautiful young lady. I can imagine how the psychs treated her, because I know the stories on them. In fact, we've mentioned in an earlier show that we did about those behind bars, in which a large percentage of them was for sexual misconduct. But she went through all of this only to find out a few months later that she had an infection that had not gone away. And she took some penicillin. That was handled, and she was ready to rock and roll. By that time, the psychiatric industry had already put in false information to her place of employment, and she got terminated.
Wow.
Lost a great job. She was an executive secretary at that time, and she lost it all. So when you start looking at the alternatives, then what you find is if you do a complete physical, you're going to find the cause of that aberrant behavior that has come about.
Okay.
There was a study done, I think we may have mentioned this in an earlier show that we did, by psychologists, psychiatrists rather, here in the state of California. And what they found in the state of California, it was done in Northern California back before the turn of the new century, in the 90s, 80s and 90s, that almost 40% of the people in the mental health industry at that time, of those they could find, had a physical problem that was causing this behavior.
I see.
So that's one alternative.
Okay.
Look for the physical problem.
Start there.
Yes. And be careful who you go to. I'm sorry, you just have to.
Okay.
As to who it's going to be.
Very good advice.
The other thing is to just get some nutritional work done and get some proper vitamins in the body.
Vitamins, as we would say here.
In British is vitamins.
Okay. What do you say to those who defend the psychiatric profession as a source of healing or relief to those who are suffering from so-called mental illnesses?
Psychiatry has never, ever presented a single cure. Get this. Never, ever presented a single cure. There's your data for that. We have video in our museum of psychiatrists being asked that specific question. No, I've never cured anyone. In other words, a cure is something we all dream about, but we have not the least idea of how to go about getting it. They don't know. So what it boils down to is you've got this profession that basically is not required. In other words, there's nothing out there that says you've got to have a medical or a scientific test to diagnose. We've said this. There's no x-ray, there's no MRI, there's no CAT scan, there's no blood test, there's no urine test to prove a mental illness. It doesn't. It can't be because it doesn't exist first. All right? Now, to hide their inability and lack of knowledge, then what they do is they just prescribe. Or they'll prescribe to the point where then, well, you know, we haven't been able to help you with drugs, we'll just give you some ECT electroconvulsive therapy, shock, 480 degrees from temple to temple. That's still done. One
right?
flew over the cuckoo's nest did not end it.
I'll be darned.
There is $3 billion a year made in electroshock payments
Unbelievable.
in the United States.
Unbelievable.
In the United States each year for shock. So they use drugs, they use shock to hide their lack of knowledge. They don't know. They cannot cure. So this is what I say to an individual. Here we are wasting over $3 billion on ECT and other things per year. It's a waste in money. But what's the worst part of this? It's a waste in lives.
Absolutely.
We have broken homes, broken lives as a result of all of this. So what do I say to you who try to defend it? I think you better look at the truth. I think you better go do a little in-depth research. Look at what really exists in that particular industry. And don't accept it on face value. For gosh sakes, don't. I mean, get real. They say they can't cure, then they must not be able to cure.
Okay, thank you. And can you give us some idea of what the Citizens Commission on Human Rights is doing to investigate and expose fraud and criminal behavior within the psychiatric industry?
We do quite a bit of research. We do quite a bit of investigation. As an example, anyone out there that's viewing this show that would like more data or feels that they've been betrayed, which means you've been abused, who has been told that they have a mental illness, you've been abused, and would like to do something about it, they can get in touch with us. And this is how we began, how we do things, and that is people who know that there's something else and want some help come to us.
Okay.
So then what we do is we investigate thoroughly. We'll pull medical records, we'll look at this thing, and all of this is confidential, but we'll pull it in, we'll look at it, and then we have connections. We, by the way, can go to the United States Department of Justice and get investigations into state facilities. We've created what we call a bust of all of the state hospitals in the state of California in the last 4 years by the Department of Justice, and we have a law agreement in federal court that our state had to agree to meet their demand for changes and improvement in the system in the treatment that they're giving our patients in state hospitals. And this came about because people contacted us and said, please help us. So anyone that wants help, we're willing to try to give it. And we'll investigate it, then we will attempt to expose whatever we can.
Okay, well, on that note, Jeff Griffin, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on The Defining Moment. I really appreciate the work that you're doing for the sake of humanity, and I really appreciate you being here today on our show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You've been watching The Defining Moment for creating a culture of conscience. You can find us on the internet at www.definingmoment.tv. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.